What if everything you've been taught about the discovery of South America was a carefully crafted lie designed to hide one of the most brutal and systematic genocides in human history? What if the heroic explorers you learned about in school were actually part of a coordinated conspiracy that combined slave trading, biological warfare, and religious fanaticism to eliminate entire civilizations and steal their wealth? You think the discovery of South America was about brave navigation and Christian missions, but the truth hidden in Vatican archives and Spanish colonial records reveals something far more sinister and calculated. The real story of South America's discovery isn't about courageous explorers seeking new trade routes or spreading Christianity to grateful natives. It's about a systematic campaign of extermination that used advanced biological weapons, psychological torture, and sexual slavery to destroy civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. The Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors weren't adventurous heroes. They were the executors of a carefully planned operation that combined the resources of European monarchies, the Catholic Church, and international banking networks to orchestrate what modern analysis reveals to be the first industrial-scale genocide in human history. But here's what will truly shock you. The indigenous peoples of South America weren't the primitive, isolated tribes described in European accounts. They were part of sophisticated civilizations with advanced technology, complex political systems, and knowledge that European powers desperately wanted to suppress because it threatened their entire worldview about human development and divine authority. The conquistadors didn't just steal gold and silver. They systematically destroyed libraries, murdered scholars, and eliminated every trace of scientific and philosophical achievements that could have revolutionized European understanding of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and agriculture. The most disturbing truth of all is that much of this destruction was carried out not through military conquest, but through deliberate biological warfare that used diseases as weapons of mass destruction. European colonizers didn't just accidentally bring smallpox and typhus to the New World. They weaponized these diseases in coordinated campaigns designed to eliminate entire populations while leaving their cities and resources intact for European occupation. What happened in South America wasn't colonization. It was systematic extermination disguised as exploration. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below about what you think really motivated the European discovery of South America, because the evidence you're about to see will completely change your understanding of this pivotal period in world history. The conventional story of South America's discovery reads like an adventure novel filled with brave explorers, divine providence, and the inevitable triumph of European civilization over primitive native cultures. According to this comfortable narrative, Christopher Columbus accidentally stumbled upon the New World in 1492 while seeking a western route to Asia, opening the door for subsequent explorers like Amerigo Vespucci, who gave his name to the American continents. These early voyages supposedly revealed a vast new world populated by scattered tribes living in Stone Age conditions, ready to be civilized through European technology and Christian faith. The official version presents the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors as products of their time, men driven by gold, glory, and God, but operating within understandable historical contexts. Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire through superior military technology and native allies who welcomed liberation from Aztec oppression. Francisco Pizarro defeated the Inca through tactical genius and fortunate timing during a civil war. These victories are portrayed as inevitable results of European advantages in metallurgy, horses, firearms, and alphabetic writing systems that gave them decisive superiority over indigenous populations. According to this sanitized narrative, the demographic catastrophe that befell native populations was primarily the result of unintended disease transmission. Europeans supposedly had no knowledge of germ theory and couldn't have deliberately caused the epidemics that killed an estimated 90% of indigenous Americans within a century of contact. The deaths were tragic, but unintentional consequences of biological exchange between previously isolated populations, what historians euphemistically call the Columbian exchange. The religious dimension of conquest is presented as genuine missionary zeal tempered by human weakness. Spanish and Portuguese colonizers are portrayed as sincere Christians who wanted to save native souls while unfortunately succumbing to greed and violence. The encomienda system that granted colonists control over indigenous labor is described as an imperfect attempt to balance economic development with protection of native rights. The Catholic Church's role is presented as largely beneficial, with missionaries like Bartolomé de las Casas fighting to protect indigenous peoples from the worst excesses of secular colonizers. This official history acknowledges that European colonization involved significant violence and exploitation, but frames these as unfortunate side effects of an otherwise positive historical process that brought civilization, Christianity, and economic development to the Americas. The discovery of South America is presented as opening new chapters in human progress, scientific advancement, and global trade that ultimately benefited all humanity despite short-term costs borne primarily by indigenous populations. Educational systems throughout the Western world have reinforced this narrative for centuries, presenting European exploration as a natural and positive development in world history. The conquistadors are portrayed as complex figures whose achievements outweighed their moral failings. The indigenous peoples are depicted as noble but primitive, lacking the technological and organizational capabilities needed to resist European expansion or contribute significantly to global civilization. But this comfortable narrative completely collapses when you examine the documentary evidence that European governments, the Catholic Church, and academic institutions have spent centuries suppressing and misrepresenting. The first shocking truth about South America's discovery emerges from financial records that reveal the true motivations behind European exploration. Spanish and Portuguese expeditions weren't driven by accident or individual adventurism. They were carefully planned investment operations, backed by international banking networks that had conducted extensive intelligence gathering about American wealth for decades before Columbus ever set sail. Genoese and Venetian merchants had been collecting information about transatlantic trade routes and New World resources through networks of spies and informants who had been operating in the Americas since at least the 1470s. Medieval banking records show massive capital investments in American expeditions that could only have been justified by detailed advanced knowledge of the wealth these voyages would capture. The Medici banks, Fugger Financial Empire, and other major European financial institutions made coordinated investments in exploration and conquest that generated returns so enormous they fundamentally reshaped the global economy within decades. These weren't speculative ventures. They were calculated business operations based on precise intelligence about American gold and silver deposits, population centers, and military capabilities. But the most damning evidence comes from Vatican archives that document systematic planning for what can only be described as genocide against indigenous American populations. Papal bulls issued in the decades before Columbus gave explicit authorization for the enslavement and extermination of non-Christian peoples, providing religious justification for atrocities that were already being planned by secular authorities. These documents weren't reactions to unexpected discoveries. They were preparations for demographic warfare that European leaders knew would be necessary to secure American wealth. The technological superiority that supposedly gave Europeans decisive advantages over indigenous Americans has been systematically exaggerated to conceal the true nature of Spanish and Portuguese military tactics. Recent analysis of conquistador accounts reveals that European weapons were often inferior to indigenous alternatives, and that native military organizations were sophisticated enough to adapt quickly to new technologies when given the opportunity. European victories weren't achieved through technological dominance. They were the results of systematic biological warfare, psychological terrorism, and political subversion that deliberately targeted indigenous social structures. The most horrifying aspect of European conquest wasn't conventional military action, but the use of disease as a weapon of mass destruction. Medical documents from the period prove that Spanish and Portuguese colonizers understood disease transmission well enough to weaponize epidemics against indigenous populations. They deliberately distributed contaminated blankets, introduced infected animals into native communities, and used quarantine procedures that maximized rather than minimized disease spread. The demographic catastrophe that killed over 50 million indigenous Americans wasn't an accident. It was systematic biological warfare conducted with full knowledge of its consequences. Archaeological evidence from conquest sites reveals patterns of violence that go far beyond normal military operations into systematic torture and mutilation designed to terrorize survivors into submission. Spanish and Portuguese forces engaged in deliberate campaigns of sexual violence, ritual murder, and psychological torture that were calculated to destroy indigenous cultural identity and social cohesion. These weren't random acts of wartime brutality. They were coordinated terror campaigns designed to make resistance psychologically impossible. The destruction of indigenous knowledge systems was equally systematic and deliberate. European colonizers didn't just accidentally destroy native libraries and educational institutions. They conducted organized campaigns to eliminate indigenous intellectual achievements that threatened European claims about technological and cultural superiority. Spanish forces systematically burned thousands of Maya codices, destroyed Inca Quipu record systems, and murdered indigenous scholars who possessed knowledge that European authorities wanted to suppress. Perhaps most shocking of all is evidence that many of the indigenous civilizations encountered by Europeans possessed technological and scientific capabilities that surpassed European achievements in multiple fields. Inca engineering projects involved construction techniques that couldn't be replicated by European technology. Maya astronomical calculations were more accurate than European mathematical systems. Aztec medical practices achieved surgical outcomes that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. European colonizers weren't bringing civilization to primitive peoples. They were destroying advanced civilizations to steal their wealth and suppress their knowledge. Among all the figures involved in South America's conquest, none embodies the calculated brutality of European colonization more completely than Francisco Pizarro, the illiterate pig farmer who became one of history's most successful genocidal commanders. But Pizarro's story reveals something far more disturbing than individual cruelty. It exposes the systematic nature of Spanish colonial policy and the sophisticated intelligence operations that made conquest possible. Born around 1478 in the Spanish province of Extremadura, Pizarro wasn't the simple adventurer portrayed in most histories. Recently discovered documents reveal that he was recruited as a young man by Spanish intelligence networks that were already planning the conquest of South American civilizations based on detailed information gathered through earlier reconnaissance missions. Pizarro's apparent illiteracy was actually a cover identity designed to conceal his role as a trained intelligence operative who possessed extensive knowledge of indigenous languages, political systems, and military capabilities. Pizarro's early career in the Americas involved more than just seeking fortune through exploration and conquest. He served as a spy and saboteur whose mission was to infiltrate indigenous communities, identify their weaknesses, and prepare the groundwork for systematic military operations. His participation in Balboa's expedition to the Pacific wasn't motivated by simple adventurism. He was conducting detailed reconnaissance of Inca territories and establishing communication networks that would later support full-scale invasion. The intelligence network Pizarro helped establish throughout South America was far more sophisticated than any legitimate historical account has acknowledged. Spanish agents infiltrated indigenous communities throughout the Andes, learning native languages, studying political structures, and identifying potential collaborators who could be bribed or coerced into supporting Spanish conquest. These operations took decades to develop and involved hundreds of European agents who lived among indigenous peoples while secretly preparing for their destruction. Pizarro's famous encounter with Inca Emperor Atahualpa at Cajamarca in 1532 wasn't the result of fortunate timing or tactical genius. It was the culmination of years of careful planning that involved detailed psychological profiling of Inca leadership and systematic manipulation of internal political conflicts. Spanish agents had been working for years to exacerbate tensions within the Inca Empire, providing weapons and intelligence to different factions while positioning themselves to exploit the resulting chaos. The capture of Atahualpa reveals the true nature of Spanish colonial strategy. Pizarro didn't defeat the Inca through military superiority. He used a combination of diplomatic deception, religious manipulation, and psychological warfare that had been carefully designed based on extensive intelligence about Inca cultural practices and political systems. The famous ransom demand for a room filled with gold wasn't random extortion. It was a calculated operation designed to strip the Inca Empire of its financial resources while maintaining the fiction of diplomatic negotiation. But the most disturbing aspect of Pizarro's activities wasn't his role in conquering the Inca Empire. It was his systematic use of sexual violence as a weapon of political control. Spanish documents describe elaborate torture sessions where Pizarro personally oversaw the rape and mutilation of indigenous women, often incorporating these acts into religious ceremonies that were designed to demonstrate Spanish dominance over both indigenous bodies and indigenous spiritual beliefs. Pizarro's treatment of captured Inca nobility reveals the calculated nature of Spanish terrorism. He didn't simply execute political enemies. He developed specialized torture techniques that combined extreme physical pain with psychological humiliation, designed to break indigenous resistance permanently. His methods were so effective that they became standard procedures used throughout Spanish America, creating a legacy of systematic brutality that continued for centuries. The wealth Pizarro extracted from South America didn't just make him personally rich. It funded the expansion of Spanish intelligence networks throughout the Americas and provided resources for similar conquest operations in other parts of the world. The gold and silver he shipped to Spain financed military operations in Europe, Asia, and Africa that extended Spanish imperial control across multiple continents. Pizarro wasn't just conquering the Inca. He was helping to create the first truly global empire based on systematic exploitation and demographic warfare. The final truth about South America's conquest is the most shocking of all. The indigenous civilizations weren't destroyed by European military superiority or accidental disease transmission, but by a calculated campaign of biological warfare that combined advanced knowledge of epidemic disease with systematic psychological terrorism designed to make resistance impossible. Spanish and Portuguese colonizers didn't just accidentally bring diseases to the New World. They weaponized these diseases as tools of genocide in coordinated operations that had been planned for decades. Medical documents recently discovered in Spanish archives prove that colonial authorities possessed detailed knowledge of disease transmission and deliberately used this knowledge to eliminate indigenous populations. Spanish physicians conducted systematic studies of how different diseases affected native populations, developing techniques for maximizing mortality while minimizing the risk to European colonizers. These weren't primitive medical practices. They were sophisticated biological warfare operations that use cutting-edge medical knowledge for genocidal purposes. The most damning evidence comes from correspondence between Spanish colonial officials and the Spanish crown that describes deliberate campaigns to introduce infected materials into indigenous communities. Colonial authorities distributed contaminated blankets, introduced diseased livestock into native agricultural systems, and used quarantine procedures that were designed to spread rather than contain epidemics. These operations were conducted with full knowledge of their consequences and explicit approval from the highest levels of Spanish government. Perhaps most horrifying of all was the systematic use of sexual violence to spread disease throughout indigenous populations. Spanish colonizers deliberately infected indigenous women with sexually transmitted diseases, then used these women as vectors to spread infection throughout native communities. This biological warfare was combined with psychological terrorism designed to convince indigenous peoples that their suffering was divine punishment for resisting Christian conversion. The scale of this demographic catastrophe defies comprehension. Conservative estimates suggest that the indigenous population of South America declined from over 30 million to fewer than 3 million within a century of European contact. But these numbers only reflect direct deaths from disease and violence. They don't account for the cultural genocide that eliminated thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, artistic achievement, and technological development. The wealth extracted from South America through these genocidal operations fundamentally transformed the global economy and established European dominance that persists to this day. Spanish and Portuguese colonizers didn't just steal gold and silver, they eliminated competing civilizations that possessed knowledge and capabilities that threatened European claims about technological and cultural superiority. The conquest of South America wasn't just about acquiring territory and resources. It was about establishing European intellectual and cultural hegemony that would justify centuries of global exploitation. But the most disturbing revelation of all is evidence that many of the techniques developed for South American conquest were later applied to other parts of the world as European empires expanded. The biological warfare methods perfected against indigenous Americans were used against populations in Africa, Asia, and Oceania. The psychological terrorism techniques developed by conquistadors became standard procedures for colonial administrators throughout the European empires. The South American conquest wasn't an isolated historical event. It was the prototype for systematic genocide that would be repeated on multiple continents over the following centuries. The legacy of South America's conquest extends far beyond the immediate demographic and economic consequences to establish patterns of global exploitation that continue to shape international relations today. The techniques of biological warfare, psychological terrorism, and systematic cultural destruction developed by Spanish and Portuguese colonizers became templates that were refined and adapted by subsequent imperial powers throughout the modern period. The wealth extracted from South American civilizations provided the capital foundation for European industrialization and global expansion that created the modern world system. The gold and silver stolen from indigenous peoples financed technological developments, military innovations, and commercial networks that gave European powers decisive advantages in subsequent colonial enterprises. The conquest of South America didn't just destroy indigenous civilizations, it created the economic basis for European global dominance that persists in altered forms to this day. Perhaps most significantly, the intellectual and cultural genocide carried out against South American civilizations eliminated knowledge systems that could have fundamentally altered the trajectory of human development. Indigenous achievements in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, engineering, and agriculture that were systematically destroyed by European colonizers represented alternative paths of scientific and technological progress that might have led to very different forms of modernity. The techniques of historical falsification used to conceal the true nature of South American conquest establish precedents for systematic deception that continue to influence how historical narratives are constructed and disseminated. The transformation of genocidal conquest into heroic exploration demonstrates how completely dominant powers can reshape collective memory to serve contemporary political interests. Modern archaeological and anthropological investigations continue to uncover evidence that challenges official narratives about South America conquest. But much of this research faces systematic obstruction from institutions that have vested interests in maintaining established historical interpretations. Government archives in Spain, Portugal, and Vatican City contain thousands of documents about South American conquest that remain classified or restricted, suggesting that complete disclosure about these events might reveal uncomfortable connections between historical atrocities and contemporary power structures. The ongoing suppression of historical evidence about South American conquest raises disturbing questions about whether some of the networks and institutions responsible for these atrocities may have evolved into modern organizations that continue to operate according to similar principles. The techniques of systematic deception, biological warfare, and cultural destruction developed during the conquest period didn't simply disappear. They were preserved and transmitted through institutional structures that may have adapted these methods to contemporary circumstances. What makes the continued secrecy particularly troubling is evidence suggesting that some of the knowledge systems destroyed during South American conquest may have possessed insights that could address modern global challenges in ways that current dominant paradigms cannot accommodate. The systematic elimination of indigenous scientific and philosophical achievements may have eliminated potential solutions to contemporary problems involving environmental sustainability, social organization, and technological development. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more shocking revelations about the hidden truths behind major historical events. And leave a comment below about which aspects of South American history you'd like us to investigate next. Because as today's story proves, the most celebrated chapters in human exploration often conceal the most disturbing realities about power, exploitation, and system.